Thank you.
Welcome to the Spiritual Forum, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. I am so excited about our guest today. But before I go into that, I just want to remind you all to do what you can. If you like this podcast, let me know. Give me a rating and review on your favorite podcast app. Check out thespiritualforum.org. You can leave a donation, small or large, anything's helpful. And don't forget that I am co-hosting a retreat this October called The Road to Eden, and it's a whole planet spirituality retreat. You can learn about that at thespiritualforum.org. So that's all I have as my run up. Today, I'm going to have an amazing conversation with Anneke Lucas. Anneke is an author, speaker, advocate for human trafficking victims, and creator of the Unconditional Model. Her work is based on spiritual experience of a decades-long healing journey after surviving being sold by her family as a sex slave. Her healing through psychotherapy, writing, yoga, and meditation were synthesized during a decade of service with incarcerated populations through the nonprofit organization she founded and with survivors of sex trafficking inside and outside of prisons. Sharing her own healing shaped her message for personal and global evolution through the unconditional model, a modality she developed and teaches in workshops with therapists, yoga instructors, and providers around the world. And she recently published a book titled Quest for Love, Memoir of a Sex Slave, which I have read in its entirety. So welcome, Anneke.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say to all the listeners, why I think this is so important, this podcast, and why I'm so committed to having your story be told. First of all, many people who know me know that I talk about you all the time because you really changed my life. You changed my life entirely. And you changed my life because I sent a prayer out to Spirit, to God, saying, show me what I haven't yet seen. Show me what I'm unable to see, because I want all of the scales off my eyes. I want to see what this world is. And I'm very aware of things like cruelty to animals, and so I'm a very much an advocate for that. But I thought I was getting just a little bit, like a little bit like I'm awake, and I knew I wasn't. And so I asked God, show me what I cannot yet see. And I stumbled upon a TED talk, which was not yours, but in the comments, somebody mentioned you. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to check that out. So anyway, that's how I found the 4-part interview series on YouTube. And I spent 4 nights, one video at a time, listening to it. And it was very difficult to listen to, but my eyes were open to what is real in the world. And I'm completely changed as a person because of that. So I'm very, very encouraging to everyone who's listening that, we are also distracted. We're all trying to live our lives. We avoid the darker parts of the world. It's very important that we do not avoid the realities of life. And because the spiritual path is really about awakening and to what is real and to becoming our true selves. And we can't do that if we're avoiding what is real. And we'll never truly be keepers of the light if we avoid the dark. So that's why I think this is so, so, so important. And I'm so excited to have you, Anneke.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, it's so beautifully put, by the way. And basically, there is no bypass. and yet, I also feel very grateful to John Paul Rice, who is someone who has that awareness and who is connected to you and who put us together. So, I really, he has a very strong voice for the light as well. And I think equally addresses the dark and his own darkness as well. And I think he does a really great job also with bringing that message out there.
He does. He's very wise, very articulate. And I had him on. I can't remember what episode it was, but we talked about the inner child, and it was a really great, great message, and it was great to have him on. And yeah, I thank him too for connecting us. When your book came out, I Facebook messaged him. I'm like, is there any chance that you could connect me with Anneke Lucas? I would love to have her on. So thank you, John. Big shout out for you. So I want to try to do this in 2 single-hour segments, if that's possible. Everyone knows my style is organic, so I'm not sure if I can stay that disciplined. But My thought is that we'll spend the first hour and allow you to really share your experience, and this is like in the 1970s in Belgium, to share your experience, some of the stuff that's in your memoir, whatever it is that you feel that you can share so that people could really understand the reality of this child sex slavery that's going on at the highest level of the elites in the world, and just it's kind of a big, huge wake-up call. So I want to focus on that and also the experiences you had, even in what seems like the most traumatic circumstances I've ever read about, that you still were looking for love, seeking love, and you still had these experiences of the light. And I just think that's really, really hopeful. And in the second hour, I'm hoping we get into your healing and what can we do? What can we do as people? And what you're doing as a more integrated, whole person now.
Mm.
So that's a lot of my talking. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your story and just kind of share what it all is?
Yes, thank you. And clearly, you're very eloquent on this subject. So I just feel, just want to say that's I'm grateful, that you can frame the conversation this way.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to really bless a lot of people. So it's going to be a great, great conversation we have.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, yes, I'm going to show my book again because the title is Quest for Love. And of course, that's not an accident. It was a quest for love. I was always looking for love. It is the memoir of a child sex slave. And I believe that on a psychological level, I was blessed to have received love in my early years, not from my mother, whom I believe is a psychopath, and she had me as a single mom in 1963 in Brussels, in Belgium. And she liked working. She was working for the then radio and television station, the only one in Belgium. And so she gave me to the communal daycare center of the town, which is a part of Brussels. And the woman who ran that daycare center loved me very much. And I've remembered being held on her body as she was even taking care of the other children. There may have been 5 or 6 or so other children, but she wrapped me on her body. That must have been with sheets. I know there were no carriers at the time. And I have remembered my mother's abuse, my mother's sexual abuse from that time, and the projection, the dark projection, which, I would say that on the one hand, my mother did not see an innocent baby at all.
Mm.
And I don't know if anyone has ever seen that, that a parent who doesn't see the innocence in their baby at all. So sometimes that comes out with weird comments, which I have a very high trigger response to, like people saying, "Oh, he's such a flirt" and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but because that natural love that babies are, that coming into the world completely pure. My mother didn't, had never clearly received that herself, and so she didn't recognize it, and all she could do with it was to try to destroy it. And that went through what I would say is constant projection, but also physical and sexual abuse. And then I was given to what I then considered my real mother. And at first, I was frozen from the abuse that had happened in the hands of this other woman. And it took a while. I remembered, for example, like turning my head away. That was all I could do, just because I was unhappy that I'd had to be away from her and be abused. And then after a while, I would just sort of feel myself melt under that loving gaze, you know, having her pet my head and say I'm cute. And I could feel it too. It mostly, you don't understand words, but you feel everything when you're an infant. So I felt the love, I felt the warmth, I felt what it was like to be a baby. And I would come to myself again and feel like myself, which at that time was, an innocent little baby, and receiving that reflection from this lovely woman.
Yeah, I think we all come in as innocent. I mean, we all just come in. I was just mentioning to somebody yesterday, it's like no matter what we've done or we might have either done or had happen to us in past lives, I think there's a reset button that happens when we come in as a baby, and everybody comes in as this innocent baby.
Absolutely. Even though there can be abuse, prenatal abuse that happens and that can affect, but nevertheless, there's a soul. And then at the moment of conception, that soul is there, and there is, there is, a full person is right there, consciousness is there and feeling everything. So even if there is prenatal abuse, there is still awareness. There is still that feeling awareness, which is, of course, has nothing to do with our material awareness and our mental capacity or anything like that. It's beyond, obviously, where we go back to when we go to the other side, beyond the physical, beyond the mental, it goes back to that pure feeling state. So I did have that experience, and I've credited that experience of being loved in my early years with my ability to know right from wrong from within. Because I had some self-esteem that grew from having a person there to reflect these human evolutionary stages emotionally about us specifically. And I, and of course, gave me the capacity to also love, and also to have a sense of what love means, what love really means versus the model that I received, which was that it was all about sex. That the only kind of love, affection, and so forth that you can receive is through sex. And that, of course, is once my mother began to sell me. Now, the sexual abuse in my early years with my mother and other family members, well, my mother abused me in anger, but an uncle abused me. He was a child himself, and he clearly believed that it was love. And even though I also, of course, initially felt the fear, I also started from that young age to believe that it was love. And then at age 5, there was a cleaning lady. My mother had married when I was 3, and we had moved to Flanders. So now I had lost my caretaker, and those are very sad times. My stepfather wasn't really there in his body. He wasn't really loving at all. He was very interested in his own son, who was born soon after, 9 months after they married. And then from that village where we lived, my mother started to sell me, but initially it was through, I think, a cleaning person who came to work with us, and her husband, who groomed me, took me out for a whole year. There were always other children there, and they eventually took me to the first, what I would say is was an orgy in a castle, and it was a dress party. So these were all aristocrats, but they were dressed like hippies. And there was hippie music playing, and Jimi Hendrix, and that music was playing. There were lots and lots and lots of drugs. And then I was abused on a stage by this husband of this cleaning lady, and horribly humiliated. And the people around me, there were quite a few people around me. This was in some kind of a large salon in a castle, and they were too high, too drunk. They were maybe a little bit disgusted by what this man was doing to me, but nobody cared. Nobody seemed to care. So I stood up and told them, "You can't do this to me. I'm going to tell on you. I'm going to make sure you all go to jail."
Wow. I mean, and you were how old?
6.
And that takes just a lot of inner strength, I think, to stand up as a 6-year-old to all these adults who are, I mean, they're acting like all this is okay, like there's nothing wrong. So that's amazing.
Well, I had been so humiliated
Mm-hmm.
that I felt that if I don't do something, I'm going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And what that meant was I was physically maybe alive, but I was going to die inside. And that was my sense of self that I believe I had from the love that I'd received.
Mm-hmm.
Sense of self, and that self would die. That connection to the soul would die if I didn't do something.
Right.
And then when I stood up, I didn't feel that I was infused with strength, but that did feel like it was God's strength. It didn't feel like it's me now. It felt like this power
Right.
can't
Right.
come through me.
Right. The opening up to the inner power. That's fascinating. So then what happened?
Well, then I was threatened extremely graphically by I guess the handler who was in charge of the children that night, and was taken somewhere and then was shown a dead body. And I was told that they didn't want me, they didn't want this to happen to me, that they liked me, they wanted to keep me there. And so I shouldn't say anything, I shouldn't speak up, basically. I should be quiet. And so that was the beginning of being used in the network in Belgium. And in the first 3 years, I was used as an expendable child. That's to say that I was given to anybody, because there were several aristocrats, particularly one baron who would kill children. And there were several men who I knew killed children. And I was around it. It happened, well, I've had a memory of something really gruesome happening. And the sadism of this baron had to do with me believing that it could be me any second. So it was really no reason why he didn't then also kill me that time. But there were several weird things like that I didn't get killed, but I certainly could have. Mm-hmm. And it was very, very clear in the first years that I was expendable, that I could be killed. And then at age 9, something very significant happened, and I was going to actually be given. So the Belgian network operated as a mafia, and that used children for blackmail mostly. So in the first years, the Belgian Minister of National Defense at the time, who was also Prime Minister twice of Belgium, a man I name in the book, who had started out his career as a butcher and has moved his way up in politics, and then became this mafioso boss of this Belgian arm of a global network, I should say. And so the sadism was complete. It was a power club, and anybody who wanted to belong was getting tested. And ultimately that meant pedophilia. And those people who couldn't do it would have been weeded out. They would call it weeding out. I say those are the people with integrity that, just find other things more important than power. But those without any qualms, and those who, let's say, are running from their own trauma the most, just running from their own pain the most, and just need that power, cost what cost, they were the ones that I then got to see, as a 6, 7, 8-year-old girl.
So it's kind of a culling of people. And it's hard to even imagine, but we see this happening today. I mean, we know this is happening today with the Jeffrey Epstein thing and all the. So it sounds like the network is using children to blackmail some people, and also to kind of discern who are these people who are like us, who will engage in these things and have this trauma, and they're the ones that will be lifted into higher levels of power. Is it like that?
Yes, exactly. Those who are more easily manipulable because they will do things
They'll
that
be a
are
puppet on
not
a string. Yeah.
ethics.
Okay. All
Exactly.
right. And then the children, I mean, you guys are just complete uh, victims, and you're just being you're the tools that they're using,
Yes.
and they have no sense of you as a human or having a purpose in life or being a being that's worth anything.
No, I found that in the network, and especially after I became, at age 9, when I was sort of given to this international networker, um, who then took an interest in me and in a completely miraculous way. Um, I, my whole mind, body, psychology had to be completely abandoned to the purpose they were training me for. And then what they were training me for, even though that was to be completely the slave of this big shot, as I call him in the book, then this big shot networker, um, I had to be, um, it was so clever. It was so well done.
Mm-hmm.
They know psychology so much better than most psychologists and psychiatrists out there. Um, they knew, there was no experimentation done with me. I was trained to be the special slave to this man, and they took my natural gifts and used those in order to, and then enhanced those gifts, but all for their service. So there's these things that are done. They were always based on torture, which makes things go very fast. Although I do believe that there are natural ways to enhance our our human experience, and our our instrument, let's say, our body mind instrument. But when it's done through torture, it does go really quickly, but it's of course all fear based, and that's necessary if you want to control someone.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that was very complete. And then again, my connection in the mind control experience, for example. So this man took an interest in me, and then and then he took me to his own homes just to teach me the ways of the elite so that I would be comfortable in that world. He was also training me sexually to make sure that I would feel pleasure, but it would still all be at the service of the man.
Mm-hmm.
I would not, get greedy with my pleasure or something like that. It would be all for the man. I was trained very specifically, very well done again. And then sent to Germany for mind control, and with an extremely sadistic doctor who I later found out was involved with had a high position in what was the German Planned Parenthood.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
So this is the person who administered the mind control. And how old were you then?
So I was 9. He was the head doctor there. There were young handlers there, 20s, 20, 24 years old, maybe, young men who were being used. It was strange, very young men. And then he didn't come in every day, but he came in sometimes, and he was extremely sadistic. And there's the example, for example, when I was being electrocuted, I was strapped to a chair, and the chair was sort of like, it was as if a chair that was tilted back. It was felt like that. And then this doctor or these handlers would just sort of come in my face, and as I was being my brain was being electrocuted, um I was being screamed at that I was a whore.
Okay. So that's a
Messaging. And so
Yeah.
that was heated, and while that was happening, I was screaming inside, I am me.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So all that
Yeah. You,
fear and all that fear, that was the only thing I had left, was just to scream, I am me, I am me, I am me. But that was surrounded by tremendous, tremendous fear that I would lose myself completely.
yeah. Yeah, which is sounds like it'd be worse than death.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And that big shot deployed me right away. I was already, I was brought back to Belgium, going to school. And then I was gone the whole summer of 72, and also the whole 2 week Christmas vacation of 72. I was getting more training. He was going to create a platform for me so that I would be a minor celebrity, so that the most powerful men in the world would take an interest in me. And of course, I was heavily trained to have those most powerful men in the world fall in love with me and think of me as their soulmate, so that I could get more. I could, I was trained to spot men's weaknesses, and all of that was to basically help my owner to have some advantage over them in
Hmm.
business or politics.
Okay. So I want to pause here for a second because just the idea of an adult male looking at a 8 or 9 or 10-year-old child as a soulmate is a strange idea. But these
Well,
men are,
when I
yeah,
was young, it was supposed to be a dream girl. And then I
uh-huh.
would grow into this minor celebrity in France, and then it would be the soulmate.
Right. Okay, got that. But I was also going to say that there's kind of an arrested development with these people, I think, so that they're
Arrested right at birth. There is no emotional development
no
at all.
development. Right. So it's not, it wouldn't be peculiar for them, I think. It's not peculiar for them to engage in these things with children, where the rest of us are, are like, what? Why? Yeah, that's a child. But
And
they
that's
just
why
don't
we
see it
can't
that way.
understand it. Like, we can't understand it because the power itself creates this mantle, um, and all these projections that are, needed. We have to project our power onto them. We have to think that they are special, smart, and so forth. But the truth is that emotionally, they are completely infantile. And I think that's what we can't understand. Why we can't understand,
Yeah.
how crazy they are. We can't understand what these people really do, why they would be doing that, because you say, well, they have everything. Why would
Right.
they rape a child? And more, because that's not all they do. They go further than that because it's satanic. They've sold their soul literally to Satan. And I like to think of these things in psychological terms, that you sell your soul to Satan because you just are such a scared little boy, and you need to protect, your mommy who abused you, and think that she's God, and then everybody else is below you. And so the superiority of that class, in fact, creates sort of a constant justification for them to do harm.
Mm. It's
Because
really interesting. And I think that because people can understand this, I think that's when they go, that's not true. That can't be true. That can't be true. And it's because our inability, we're like projecting our own selves onto other people. Like they must think like I do, and they don't. It's very different.
they do not think the way we do at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And mostly it's that we've been brainwashed into believing that they have something that we don't have, when it's in fact exactly the opposite. They just take from us. They take our power, they take everything from us. I mean, they're not different to us. They're completely exploitative because they have no sense of self. They have no connection to spirit because they have no sense of self. And so they are completely invested in the material world, which means they are looking for paradise here on earth through luxury and so forth. But also the power is what gives them this constant platform in order to seek freedom from what is essentially their own unresolved trauma.
Yeah, I think that really, really explains it all. And I think what was interesting in your book is it seemed to me like even as a 9, 10-year-old child, you could see some of that.
Yes, well, the way that this big shot took an interest in me is that I would say that I had an influx of Christ consciousness. It would have never happened without extreme divine aid. So, as a 9-year-old girl, in the darkest of circumstances, I saw the little boy in him. I saw all his fears. I saw how he had been afraid that he's slow, that he can't follow, that he's stupid, that he's ugly. I saw all of it in a moment when when I was actually essentially laughing at him, but that laughter transformed and became like Christ coming through me.
Interesting. So it wasn't just that you were really, really advanced child, although you probably are, but it wasn't just that. You credit this to a Christ consciousness that is like the awareness is coming through you,
Yes, it
and
was
you're
one
yeah.
of those moments where I didn't care if I was going to be killed or not. I was laughing at him, which would have been caustic and sarcastic, but instead, this other energy came through me, and this great love. Now I'm just seeing all of his own vulnerabilities, and I'm understanding things that I would and that I would not normally have understood at all, because I had seen him as a monster, and then suddenly I see all of him. I see his soul, I see his pain, I see his fears. And as I saw that, and of course he knew, and he was quite insecure because he could see that I was seeing that. So his interpretation of this moment of meeting Christ, if you will, was that I was sophisticated.
Mm.
And that's why he took an interest.
Mm-hmm.
So now, he set out to then maximally exploit me now, because now he's got this. So that special gift, I was trained, so that infusion of Christ consciousness, I was then trained to find men's weaknesses, and then similarly to put this soothing balm over their greatest fears and weaknesses, so that I could give them that nurturing they never received.
Wow. And
Either
yeah,
in
and while you're doing that for them, they're using this for the blackmail and for the network and finding their next puppets and all of that.
Yes, and not only am I doing that for them in this completely contrived way, but it's also so contrived that the fact that I have to do it, they ultimately, emotionally, this is what happens with mind control. You get in an emotional reality with someone, but it's not grounded.
Mm.
But emotionally, it's all true. It's like good acting. You get into it with this person, and you're like giving them that love that they never received, and in that moment they're receiving that love that they've never received, and they feel incredibly good and high because now they're in that moment. And then of course it's a child slave. So it does so after the experience, it's over.
Right, right. So it's like a drug or something, some sort of high, and then we can get rid of this thing.
It's exactly that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Wow.
of course, this thing being a little girl who could never go and talk, who has no power at all in the world, who could never, be a threat in any way, because that is how afraid they are to show themselves, to be vulnerable, which of course to them is weakness.
Right, right. I have a couple of questions. Well, one is you talk about how you're doing this and you're also going to school, and I think people they go, well, if you're going to school, you must not be experiencing trauma, and that's just not true at all. There's no one to talk to. I mean, right? There's no one to talk to about this. Who are you going to talk to about this?
Oh yes, and that continued long after school. Who are you going to talk to this? Who are you going to talk about? But of course, when I was going to school in the week, I was not aware of what was happening, mostly in the weekends. Even there were days that I was taken out of school, and my mother would take me to one man or something. The next day I would go to school and I would have been sick, and I would have a doctor's note, and I would not remember what had happened, because the shame
Mm,
that I'm a whore.
right, because that was programmed into you. Yeah.
Well, they tried to program that into me, and I was, mentally fighting it. But before that, I had been called a whore from 6 to 9. I'd been called a whore, thousands of times.
Wow.
So I was just naturally, they just went there automatically. I was called a whore. They thought of me as that also, it's not like they saw me as a child either, just like my mother, didn't really see the child in the child, just think that children are these little adults because they've never had a childhood, they've never
Right.
experienced the reflection of their own innocence. So they don't believe in innocence even.
Right.
But as far as not, so I had my own protection and not remembering. And then there was my mother, whose denial was so thick that in her presence, none of that happened. None of that could exist because she was the best mother on earth.
Mm.
So we had that. So in her presence, I couldn't be myself at all, but it was convenient to not at all be myself and then also remember what that meant, being myself, in other ways.
Yeah, I think another thing that I got out of your book, well, I got so much out of your book, but you talked about how clever they were. They were so clever. I mean, I could see that so clearly. And it looked to me like one of the things they did is to the children, they denied you the ability to even have an identity of being innocent. So they
Yeah.
corrupted you. They corrupted you. You all as children were forced to do horrible things that no children, not just the sexuality and with not just that, other things. The story you tell about the rabbits and harming each other and things like that. You're forced to do these things. I'm sure they have lots of motives for that, but the motive that really stuck out for me is then you're not innocent. You've done something bad.
And then
And
they can prove to themselves that they are, that is the right, that is correct.
right.
If they don't believe in their own innocence, at the end of the day, they don't have a sense of themselves because they've never had a reflection of their innocence when they were babies. And because they've never had that reflection, they've created this entire belief system, which is called Satanism, around not being innocent. Nobody's innocent.
Uh-huh.
No
Right.
one's innocent. And anybody who pretends to be innocent is faking it, is false, right? And
Yes.
anybody who talks about right and wrong can only be a moralistic imposition. They don't understand that it's something that is innate, that is, there's a natural law that we automatically connect to on a deeper level, that we know right from wrong. To them, right and wrong are religious impositions and
Okay.
externally imposed beliefs rather than real laws.
Right. Okay. And the fact that the Christ consciousness could infuse you and show you the truth of these people who we would call monsters or evil or all sorts of words, but that you as a young child were able to see beyond the appearances, way beyond all those layers of stuff, that the truth of their being, that there's something that's been lost there. To me that, I mean, I think that your experience is just so horrifying, but there's also kind of a good news thing to it, because if you can do that, if you can do that, we can do that. Everyone can do that. I think just be an opening for this Christ consciousness and see what is at the core of people. And that doesn't excuse them at all. You don't go, oh gosh, now I get it, I'll do whatever you want. It's not like that.
No, no.
No, but there's some, I think to heal this, to me it seems like we first have to see it.
Yes.
We first have to see it. And that's why we're talking today, because we first have to see this. This is rampant in our world. And people will say, oh, it's just a few children. It's rampant in our world. And it's
Not
all
a few
across our
children.
world.
Not a
Right.
few children.
Right. It's not a few children. And because I read somewhere recently, somebody says, well, there's more children abused at home than there are on these networks. It's like,
Well,
well,
it goes together.
I know.
Children that are abused at home that end up in the networks.
Right, right. And you don't just say, well, because of that, because of this is happening, that's not bad, or we shouldn't do something about this because this is happening over there. It's just
Also,
really,
yeah, and
really
it's
bad.
also not just children that are trafficked across the border. Maybe they were used for these things. I mean, I'm sure that some of those children are trafficked. Obviously, they're so vulnerable. But there's all children are vulnerable, first of all.
Yeah.
And it all, and parents have to be very guarded, for their very on guard to protect their children from sexual abuse and from any kind of other abuse that is going on. I mean, that's a whole different conversation, but no, there's a lot of children that are very vulnerable. There's a lot of abusive households, and those are the very people that are being attracted to this. And then also there's a lot of Satanists, and it's maybe not called Satanists everywhere. They can be other secret societies, but there's a lot of people that have no sense of self, that are putting their own children up in these groups that are existing on the local level everywhere. I think we have to understand that. I speak to survivors all day long, survivors of satanic ritual abuse and survivors of mind control. And this happens everywhere in the Western world. And most of the people that I speak to, their families belonged to a sort of a satellite group of a small town or a larger town, where there's a group of people who have the power and have that same kind of club that I was describing, that I was trafficked to in Belgium, which is a small country. So for me, it was on the national level in a small country. And then in the United States and Canada and Australia, it'll be a small group on a local level, on a town level, who then give their children up, and that way then connect to people higher up in that network, in that same network, through the secret societies or through whatever club they're in.
And these people are wielding power, which is why it's so hard to get out.
Yes.
I was reading about the case. What was the name of the case in Belgium where
Dutroux.
Yes. I was reading about that yesterday, and how their witnesses disappeared, like people who were
30
going to
witnesses
died mysteriously or suddenly. And so it's like these people are in high power, so they can squelch anything.
Yes.
And I think in the second hour, I do want to go into what we can do about that, because I think that's a really good conversation. But I kind of want to get back to your experience in the network. And I'm interested in those times when you also saw the light.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Of course. Yes, I love to talk about that. So I found at the end of the day that all the experiences I had in the network, if there was no light present, or if there was no presence, no benign, what I felt was like a benign presence, very loving. And I felt it was other than me. I didn't feel that this was coming from me. I felt that there was a benign presence that was extremely loving, and of course benign. And I would get messages, and those messages would always be helpful. So that was the subtlest form that it would take. And the times that I didn't have this, I realized in later life that the reason I didn't have it then, that I didn't have this comfort and support in the moment, was because there was something that I needed to learn from the experience. Because if I didn't have it, then I needed to go through the repressed feelings more of the experience, the grief and the pain of the experience. And as I would be going through that grief and the pain, I would learn something that was spiritually important to learn.
Okay.
So there's a reason why that presence was sometimes not there. And of course, when it was there, it was that soothing balm that gave me hope, or awareness, mostly awareness, the greater awareness of the experience that I needed to survive or to be okay again. And then I started, there's an experience that I describe in the book when I was left alone in a house without food for several days. So there I kind of naturally ended up sitting in a meditation posture, and I started seeing a light. And, you know, it's as a beautiful, bright yet subtle, whitish, yellowish light that would appear in front of my eyes, whether they were open or closed. So it was better to close them. Now I see this light still. It always feels like a blessing. Sometimes there's a little message that comes with it, but not always. And so there again, this light that I saw there felt very soothing. And I felt that this light now, this consciousness or this light itself was teaching me what I needed for that experience, and also getting me really interested in death since I almost died. There was this awareness, though, that there's more to life than body and then the mind, and that there's, you know, something to prepare for with going towards death, that this is not just like this is your life and then boom, that's it, that there's more to life. I learned that from that experience. I'm sitting, you know, while I was starving and while I thought I might die, came pretty close. And of course, ultimately, I had this powerful near-death experience in the most dramatic moment, which I think is the you know, sort of the climax of the book, is that event, and then the near-death experience that followed, which put me directly, you know, on the other side of the ether. And then that put me directly in front of my own teacher and other beings. It wasn't just that teacher, there were other beings there. And this absolutely glorious experience, glorious experience. I can't describe it any other way. It was more true than anything else I've ever experienced. And it gave me the bliss that is lifting the veil a little bit and just feeling that tremendous love and the bliss. And I would say the humor, the humor of God's humor, or, you know, my teacher's humor, sense of humor. And this was my teacher. I didn't know if this was a male or a female, but I did know our issues from, you know, he reminded me directly of a past life in which I had reached some degree of love, but couldn't understand these people who hurt and killed children. And so it was very clear that I had been given this experience in order to use this life to develop my love fully, to be able to love everyone. But the bliss I experienced there was also to model what I should be striving for in my healing, that I wouldn't fall into the many traps that had been laid out. Because it's not like I came out and now, because I had these moments of rebellion, I had self-esteem. My ego was completely destroyed, wounded tremendously, covered with layers and layers and layers of lies that I had to break out of. And it was going to take a long time. And I did not have a strong self-esteem at all. And self-esteem is sort of an anchor in the world. And I didn't have that. I knew I didn't want power, but I also didn't have self-esteem. So after my rescue, the healing told me I should look for that subtle bliss, which is powerful, the most powerful, but it's also subtle. And it was subtler than what I had experienced, which were these most high of any highs.
Yeah, and having read your book, the audience who's listening now doesn't even have the context of that bliss experience, but it was absolutely a horrid situation that you were put in. Absolutely an abomination. It's like no body should ever have to be in that situation. And the fact that Spirit, God, the light, you know, blessed you out of this in a way that's so magnanimous. I mean, to me, your story is so much a story of hope. And I always say, Anneke Lucas is like, you're my idol for healing. It's like you healed all of this amazing darkness, and it gives hope for all of us. It really does. It's very amazing. And I have to also say, I'll admit that I'm reading your book. You're talking about those 4 days when you were without food, and I
Five,
mean,
5.
5 days. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, as a parent, I'm sitting there, I'm so mad at your mom. I'm so mad at these characters. And I'm having to kind of watch my anger, my rage, my what's happening inside me about this. And I'm looking at you as a child who's able to see it, with that infusion of the Christ light, see things differently. And it just reminds me of, okay, I need to get to that place. Not again, like this is all excusable. It's not excusable. It's not okay. But to be at this place where, like you said, to get to this place where you can love everyone,
And I'm not
it's
there, just to be clear, it's not like I'm there all the time.
well, good to know.
I'm healing all the time, and it's not going
Yeah.
to end.
Right. And it's a process. It's a process, but you're in that process. Given all that's happened to you, you're in that process. And that's a miracle, I think.
Oh, absolutely. No, I should have been dead 1,000 times over. I shouldn't be alive. And, you know, all of life is a miracle, though. I mean, really, all of it is miraculous. I feel now, with the healing that I have received, it's all grace. It's all
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Everything is God. And everything is here only to help us grow so that we can learn that this is not where it's at. That we want to expand our consciousness to reach Christ. We want to expand to that Christ consciousness and let go of these layers that put us in this delusive state, I believe, the delusive state that matter is matter and that everything is as it seems.
Yes. Yes. I think this is a really good place to close this hour. I really appreciate. We could talk for hours. I do really recommend your book. You do say that it requires courage to read your story, which it does, but it really is a great and very important story to read and to really digest. So I'll be back with the second hour with Annika, and we're going to kind of look at more of the healing and more of what she's doing today with all of this. And I just appreciate everyone hanging in there for an hour. And I'm trying to do some hour segments because I also know it's difficult for people to stay in this space for hours on end. It's difficult for most people. And for all of you who hung in there and who are willing to read the story, God bless you all. Thank you for bearing witness. And I'll be back in a second hour with Annika. Thank you so much. And I now close this spiritual forum.